Welcome to 3 Books with Neil Pasricha, where each chapter we uncover and discuss the 3 most formative books of an inspiring individual. We believe books change lives, and that's why we are the only podcast in the world by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. Thanks so much for joining us. We're all gonna die, and some people think that there are only 2 ways that we ever sort of wrestle that deep fear out of our systems. I heard an interview with Dave Barry once where he said, you know what? There's 2 main coping mechanisms. One is religion, or the idea that we're all in service of something bigger than ourselves. There's another place that we might be going to. There's something that we're playing for. This is all a part of a bigger deal, okay? That's a coping mechanism with death. And the other one is comedy, absurdity, laughing at it, understanding that life is infinitesimally short and finite, and the average lifespan on Earth right now is somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30,000 days. And because we all have such limited amounts of sunsets and bowls of ice cream and kissing our kids goodnight, it's more important to be happy and to laugh and enjoy all the simple little pleasures we can while we're here on these little short journeys. And I don't mean to start with something so heavy, but that's actually where Dave Barry's work sort of takes me. Because as a kid, I lived in what I would call like a comedy, dead zone, like a barren comedy landscape. I mean, you remember before the internet, it was just kind of hard to find stuff, period. You wanted to look something up, you had to find like a card catalog. You might be scrolling through microfiche in the basement of some university campus. You went to the bookstore. You did all the things that we still do today, but it was just more difficult and it was slower and it was harder to find. And comedy was one of those things for me. I loved things that were funny. I loved laughing as a child, but for me it was like, is there a new Mad magazine? Is there a new Garfield or maybe a Calvin and Hobbes? And often, is there a new Dave Barry strip, a new Dave Barry column in the local newspaper? So for those that don't know, Dave Barry, who's been called the funniest man in America by the New York Times, evolved into the most predominant voice in comedy around the world. See, from the 1980s to, I'm going to get the exact years here, he wrote a syndicated column in the Miami Herald that was published in over 500 newspapers. Okay, so he wrote like a comedy column. He wrote a funny column. Like the idea that you could even do that was so baffling to me as a child. But he was writing this column from 1983 all the way up to 2005. So like more than 20 years, he was writing a weekly comedy column. And what did this do to people around the world? Well, I think it did a lot to them. It's different than Sarah Anderson, who we talked about in the last chapter of 3 Books, who sort of went straight to digital and found an online audience, and that turns into books. That's an incredible model. But in this old model, it's you write a newspaper column, people read it around the world in their lawn chairs, inside of their swimming pools, wherever they are, and it grows and grows and grows through slower means. Dave Barry ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize for his work as a comedy writer. He's written over 30 books, many of which are New York Times bestsellers. We talk about some of them on this program, but I most recently read Best State Ever, A Florida Man Defends His Homeland by Dave Barry, which I strongly recommend. He's written more than 30 books. And the other thing that's so impressive about Dave Barry is that he's such a polymath. You're going to hear this popping out of the conversation. And in a way, it makes me think that we're all like this. Like we all have these wide variety of passions and ambitions as children, and Dave just never tamped them out. Like he just let them keep going. So he's still a musician. He plays in a band with people like Stephen King and Mitch Albom. You're going to hear us talk about that, and which is an amazing group of people to have in a band. They're called the Rock Bottom Remainders. He also writes fiction. He talks about how writing fiction is so different, and he has this cue card approach for sort of developing storylines, which I found really interesting. And he also has written for TV. He's the basis of the TV show Dave's World, which was popular on television throughout the 1990s. He has had such a varied and interesting career, and it's still going. He's still writing. He's still publishing books. This man is 70 years old. He's living in Florida. He has a great life. He visits his independent bookstore regularly, buys books, reads them. You hear his wife in the background speaking to us at some parts of this conversation. He's also responsible for popularizing International Talk Like a Pirate Day every year on September 19th. That's true. I did not make that up. He's actually responsible for popularizing International Talk Like a Pirate Day. This guy is a legend, okay? And so I was super intimidated. I was super nervous to both reach out to him, get his blessing to kind of fly down to Coral Gables, Florida, and where's the home of his favorite bookstore, Books&Books, run by Mitchell Kaplan. Mitchell's going to be a future guest on 3 Books, by the way. I'm really excited to share that with you. But we go into this giant kind of cavernous room with 30-foot ceilings and a fireplace in a Books&Books bookstore in Coral Gables, Florida. And we end up launching into this conversation that's really stuck with me. And so much about the themes we talk about are about, I think, accessibility and perspective in the world today. Life is fast, life is rambling, life is exploding, there's information everywhere. What gave Dave the perspective to look at the world through this lens of comedy? How do we all embrace absurdity more in our lives? How do we all embrace like the trivialities, and how do we embrace the small little pleasures so that we can live great lives? How do these themes sort of swirl together into our lives today? Well, I can't wait for you to hear Dave Barry, the hilarious Dave Barry. You'll hear me laughing out loud so many times as we have this fascinating conversation in the Books&Books bookstore in Coral Gables, Florida. Hey, Dave.
Hey.
Thank you so much for welcoming me to your city. I was going to say Miami, but it's not Miami.
It's Coral Gables.
It's Coral Gables.
Well, we say Miami because it kind of is. It's like Miami with more rules.
What are the extra rules?
Well, like, for example, Coral Gables. My joke used to be Coral Gables where life itself is illegal, but it's not quite that bad. It's just, it's known for being very strict. Like, I will tell you, when I first came here, which was mid-'80s, and I got a house and hired a painter to come paint the living room. It was white, and I wanted him to come and paint it white again, just like newer white.
Yeah.
Basically, I was going from white to white paint in the living room. And I just assumed that would be a legal maneuver. You can imagine how foolish I am to think that. So the painter comes, and like literally a half an hour after he gets there, there's a knock on the door, and it's a uniformed Coral Gables employee asking me, "Are you getting your house painted?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, you need a permit for that." And I go,
"Are you talking about the inside or the outside of the house?"
Inside the house.
Inside your house.
Inside the house. Inside. And I said, I need a permit to paint my living room. He said, "Yeah, if you do any home improvement that costs more than $50 in the city of Coral Gables, you have to have a permit."
Presumably the permit costs money.
I said, "Well, how do I get a permit?" And meanwhile, the painter's in the other room going, "Oh, gee." Anyway, so the painter says, "I can do this. It's going to end up costing you more of my time to go to downtown Coral Gables to get this permit than it will take me to actually paint." But he said, "Now you're going to get a ticket if you don't. So, either you got to do it or I do." So I pay the painter to go get a permit to paint my white living room white again. And I wrote a column about that immediately, it's like, what kind of place have I moved into? And I got all this mail from all these Coral Gables residents who say, "Oh yeah, like I wanted to change out a sink, but I did it at 3:00 in the morning." people were like sneaking repair people into their houses. And meanwhile, in the same city, in the same neighborhood where I live in, there was a house we called the drug dealer house.
Right.
Because they were selling drugs
right there.
Apparently that was okay.
I did read your Florida book, which highlights many of the stories that come up with the man bites dog and so on. So we're going to get into that. And that's hilarious about Coral Gables. And not only are we in Coral Gables, Dave, we're in your favorite bookstore, right? We're in Books&Books.
Books&Books, which is...
Tell us about this store, because I'm looking around, I see huge, tall, like that'd be like 20, 30-foot ceilings. We're ensconced in like these $1,000 art books in this one room. This bookstore is full of tons of rooms. Lots of people going out. There's a cafe. People are having lunch. You just ate lunch here at the bookstore?
I hear lunch all the time.
Really?
And at night, if you come here, there'll be usually there's a musical group performing in the patio. They sell wine and beer. They don't sell books here anymore. No, I'm kidding. They do sell books. But it was started by a guy named Mitchell Kaplan about when I came to Miami about 30 years ago. And Mitchell is like a combination of just book guru guy and entrepreneur. He was an English teacher, but that was not his real calling. His calling was this, and he just wanted to, make a good bookstore. And he managed to do this when all the big chains came in, the Barnes and Noble and the Borders and all those chains that came in and then got kind of wiped out by Amazon.
Yeah.
He survived all that.
Yeah.
And has not only survived but expanded. He has stores all around.
8 stores.
Yeah.
Including Key West.
And they're all great stores. They're all local, very local. No one store looks like any other store.
Different buyers or something he said, right? I think they all have different buyers. I heard him
everything,
say that. Yeah.
Everything's different. I mean, from the one store to the other, you would not know that except for the name that they were the same. They were the same group. Anyway, and the community just loves him because we are like, I personally, no offense to the big chains.
You can offend the big chains.
I would never go. There is a big chain not far from here, and I will never go buy a book there because I'm loyal to Mitchell. And a lot of the community feels that way. He brings in authors all the time.
600 events a year, they told me. That's more than 2 a day, really, if you don't take out the holidays and stuff.
Many nights, yeah. I mean,
I saw their sign outside at 2 tonight.
Yep. And so it's just a great gathering place. It's a wonderful bookstore.
There's a huge stone kind of fireplace behind you, no fire in it. There's a big sign on the wall that says Assoline, Assoline, which I didn't know what that meant. But
I don't know what it means. I never noticed it.
That's the publisher of every book in this whole room.
Oh.
It's a French publisher. They make all these $1,000 art books of like Andy Warhol books, the Impossible collection of design, of jewelry, of cars. So we're surrounded in these books. So
these
do not start a fire.
Like the Seinfeld routine about the coffee table book that can actually be used as a Kramer made. That kind of book. These are gigantic books. I would want to work out for a couple of weeks before I even pick one of these up.
If you were a shoplifter, you would definitely.
No, you could not shoplift.
You could not lift it.
You
Never
would
mind
not get far
shoplifting.
on foot. Fortunately, nobody steals books. I think a book salesman.
It's like stealing education. It's like trying to steal a college class.
Yeah. Nobody would ever. I was being driven around once in Chicago by a bookseller whose car was completely full of books, and he never locked. He said, if I had a pair of $3 sunglasses, I'd have to lock the door. Somebody would steal them, but nobody's going to steal books. It's kind of sad. Or maybe that's just Chicago. Here in Miami, damn it, we would steal books. We'd steal the car.
That's something to be proud of if you're with the highest rate of shoplifting in books. And it's funny about books, which books get stolen and which books are controversial and which books change lives and shape lives, and so much history here in this room and in this city. And so I'm really excited to talk to you, Dave, because as I mentioned in the introduction, which I'm going to record later, but I'm going to refer to it as if I've recorded it in the past, I read your work growing up. And for me, humor as a kid was a really barren landscape. I mean, there was a couple dog-eared
Well, you were
Ziggies.
in Canada, right? I mean...
I was in a barren landscape, period.
Yeah.
But there was a couple dog-eared Ziggies kind of hanging around. The local Kohl's bookstore had Garfield and maybe some Far Side, Mad Magazine, of course. But to find a humor writer writing in a newspaper that was syndicated over 500 outlets, and you've won a Pulitzer Prize, you've helped popularize International Talk Like a Pirate Day, you've done so much, and you made it real for me. You made me realize you could write stuff that was funny and people would read it and like it, and that could be a thing. And so to sit down with you right now in your hometown, in your home bookstore, talking to you about the 3 most formative books in your life is a real honor for me. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
And can we jump into the books?
Yeah.
For each book, I think what I'll do, if you're okay with it.
I just want to say before, for our listening audience, that I'm absolutely terrified because you emailed me ahead of time and said that I had named 3 books that were influential in my life. And of course, I read a lot of books in my life, but most of them I read a long time ago.
Right.
I'm thinking
that's what formative means.
Can I even remember that book? I know I loved it. So I'm nervous now. It's like having a test. Like having a quiz. But okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're nervous because usually nerves are a sign of good quality. You're going to perform well. And so what I'll do is I'll give a quick overview of each book, and then I'll ask you what your relationship is with each one. Sure. And then I have a couple questions from each one. So for the first book, a couple words from me. It's called Chips Off the Old Benchley by Robert Benchley. Robert Benchley, of course, lived from, I shouldn't say of course, because it was new to me, but he lived from 1889 to 1945. He was born in
Worcester, Massachusetts.
Worcester, Massachusetts, the word that's so hard to say. Worcester, Massachusetts, died in New York City. And this book was a collection of his writings from Vanity Fair, The New Yorker. He wrote over 600 of these articles in his life. It was published in 1949 by Gertrude Benchley and then republished in 1976 by Harper Row Publishers. When I thought about researching Robert Benchley a little bit to talk to you about this book, Dave, a couple things stood out for me. One is he's got an interesting family tree. I mean, this guy is the great-grandson of Henry Benchley.
From Texas.
Who founded Benchley, Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, I should.
And he was like a big guy in the Underground Railroad or something.
Exactly. You passed the test, Dave.
I know a little about Robert Benchley.
He was jailed for for helping with the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
And then his grandson, Robert Benchley's grandson, so we talk about grandfather. His grandson was Peter Benchley,
who wrote Jaws. And he had a couple of kids, Nathaniel, who I actually came to know over the years, and another kid who also became writers. So quite a literary group.
Beautiful. It's beautiful connecting with writers and then getting to know them. I interviewed Seth Godin, a marketing writer, and he was talking about Zig Ziglar. And then the conversation turns out he became friends with Zig, and it was beautiful. So
that's the beauty of the book world, by the way. And I'd say this to my daughter a lot, who's 18 now.
Yeah.
She kind of grew up with a dad who was an author. She's seen in book signings and stuff. I would always say to her, one of the wonderful things about the book world is, if you really like an author, the odds are really good you can meet that author and have your picture taken with that author. It's unlike, because it's so much smaller in terms of celebrity and fame and money. But like if you like a certain movie star or a certain
zero chance,
they might retweet.
They might retweet you once,
or you'll like a musician, you're going to end up in the back of a gigantic stadium and wave. But if you like an author, because we're pathetic, we go around, we retail our books and if you come to a book, if you have a bookstore like this one and you're anywhere near you, you can meet most of the top authors of your era if you just are patient and go to the sign. And not only can you meet them, they'll be happy to meet you because they like it when people come to see them at book signings. It's
totally
very different. Anyway, I interrupted.
No. I was just going to say about Robert Benchley. The only other thing I wanted to mention before we ask you about your relationship is that his older brother Edmund was rushed to the Spanish-American War in 1898, just days after graduating from West Point. It was almost instantly killed.
Yep.
A bike telegram messenger rushed to the Benchley family on their July 4th picnic to say that he had died. At which point his mom yelled out, apparently, by claims, "Why couldn't it have been Robert?"
Yeah, that's like a tough thing to hear your mom say.
Tough thing to hear your mom say.
And your brother just died,
And tough thing for your mom to have sort of immortalized on Wikipedia forever.
Right. I'm sure.
Like, who knows if he actually
said
that?
If she were around today, she would be like,
she
would say, "What the hell is Wikipedia?"
Exactly. So Robert Benchley is known for his absurdist, surreal, silly humor, which still feels incredibly fresh. The sentence I pulled out to talk about this book is from the foreword, every sentence the reader traversed with Robert Benchley was apt to become an adventure. Reminds me of your work, Dave. You could never know when you started where you would end up, but neither did he. This book is one of his many collections of all of his essays. Tell us about your relationship with Robert Benchley, and this book chips off the old Benchley or any of his collected essays.
We'll just use that as sort of the generic one because he wrote only columns. He never wrote a book, and so all of his books that I have, and I have all of them, are basically collections, compilations. Anyway, I came across Robert Benchley through my dad. My dad was born 1917, so he would have been, what?
101.
Yeah, he's not. Well, okay, that's very good that you could do that.
Well, because you said 17, I'm like, it's 18.
No,
so like I said,
that was no, but I mean, I'm sure that he was.
I'm also East Indian. We're good at adding.
He was I guess I was trying to say my dad was a young man when Robert Benchley was kind of at his prime in the 30s, 40s, and my dad was a big fan of Robert Benchley. Loves humor, always loved humor, and we had these collections around our house of Benchley books, and I don't remember what exact point in my life I started reading them. But it was this revelation to me that I was so used to. The kind of humor that I was used to was like Mad Magazine, comic books. It was funny, but it was kind of slapstick, obvious fun. And then I suddenly picked up these books where sometimes I didn't know what he was talking about.
What year are we talking about, or era for you?
This would have been the late 50s.
50s, okay.
Yeah, I would have been like 10, 11 years old. Mm-hmm. And I just was mesmerized by how two things. One, it was how different it was from anything else I'd ever read. And the other was how silly it was. hilarious, but silly in a way that I was not used to. That with the quote you read, you never knew where the sentence was going to go. But he loved to be, for example, the false authority, where he would write an entire essay on the sex life of the newt or something like that, which is one of his famous ones. And, every single thing in it was ridiculous. He didn't know anything about newts, and he's just sitting in his apartment in New York City typing
Making it all
away.
up.
Anyway, I became obsessed with Robert Benchley, and I read everything. Back then, you could every now and then see him on television. Not he was dead, but he did all these shorts for the movies. In fact, in a way, his career declined as a writer when he went to Hollywood and was paid a lot of money to be in these kind of silly shorts. But
he won an Academy Award for the movie How to Sleep.
How to Sleep. He also recorded what I think is, to this day, one of the funniest humor bits ever. And I could not find it on YouTube, and apparently it's a rights issue. But it was it's called The Treasurer's Report, and it is this absolutely brilliant 4 or 5 minute monologue by a guy from you never find out what organization it is. You never find out anything really, but or what company it is. But he gets up and gives the Treasurer's Report, and it's very hard to describe why it's as funny as it is. But it is really funny. And for a while, he was paid $500 a week to do that every night in Broadway as part of a review.
Oh, interesting.
$500 a week, and this is in 1945 or something.
That's like $50,000 a week. Yeah,
just to get up and give this, and it's really
the same thing every night.
Every night. He did the Treasurer's Report. He was masterfully good at it by the end.
Good thing they didn't have YouTube. That would have really killed his bit.
Yeah. So anyway, he was just this wonderfully funny, silly guy. And from the moment I started reading Robert Benchley, that was my standard of what was really funny. And no question, I was influenced by when I started writing newspaper humor columns, which I started in high school and then college, and then when I got to work for a newspaper. Art Buchwald was huge then. Irma Bombeck, Russell Baker, there were a lot of good newspaper humor writers. I said Russell Baker, but the one I wanted to be like was Robert Benchley. I wanted to have that element of, beyond satire, just into just pure crazy, where he would just veer off the road. And the other thing is and this is, you have to be brave to do this or crazy, but he would start a column on one topic and end up on a completely different topic and just end it, and no effort whatever to go back to anything, or, he didn't care. He just thought, whatever struck him as funny is what he would write. And that's the kind of humor I wanted to write.
And, there's this great line from the foreword of this book. They say, I should probably, as I keep mentioning this forward, I should probably say who wrote the forward. Forward was written by Frank Sullivan, who I don't know, you may know. It says, every sentence, I quoted about, you don't know where it's going to end up. In one of the essays, he says, Mr. Costello fell into a pulp machine and was swashed around until all they had to do was dry him out, and they could have printed the Sunday Times on him. And then the forward guy says, most people would have stopped there. But Mr. Benchley continues to write, in fact, that is just what they did do. And it was one of the best editions of the Sunday Times ever run off the presses because it had human interest. And it's so funny because it's like, this is written almost 100 years ago. 100 years ago, the stuff I read from 100 years ago isn't funny. Because of course, humor changes. And this stuff is lasting.
In all fairness, a lot of the Robert Benchley now, you read it now and it's hard to get. He has a lot of references, which is, again, something I learned from Robert Benchley.
Yeah.
Is that if you are into humor, if you were going to make that your career, you have to realize you have a shelf life.
Yeah.
And it may last longer with some people than others, but much of Robert Benchley is kind of inaccessible to a lot of people today.
We don't even watch the first few seasons of South Park because we don't think they're funny. Or the last few seasons of The Simpsons. We're like, even the modern funny stuff, we're like, that's not funny anymore, right?
Yeah, you have to accept that. The other thing about Benchley that always impressed me, he was, in addition to being the funniest writer of his age by acclaim, he was also a really good theater critic. He lived in New York, covered the theater quite seriously, very erudite guy, went to Harvard, knew everybody, read everything. So he's a very sharp, well-educated man, and still chose in the end, what he really wanted to do was be silly. So
that's a really good observation. You also said the phrase, you said silly a few times, and I've heard you say once in the past, Dave, on a different interview, I hope I'm not misquoting you, he had the confidence to be silly, or the courage to be silly. We look around today, Can you just explain what you mean by that? The courage to be silly.
Yeah, if you look at how people write humor, most humor, and I speak as a person who has been over the years been inundated with humor written by people who want to write humor.
Of course, you've been called the funniest man in America by the New York Times. You're going to get humor sent to you.
And if anybody would know, it'd be the New York Times. But anyway, the most humor is really derivative. You see something you like, and you want to write like that, and you want to write to the audience that person wrote to, and you want to appeal to that audience. So you're going to write something that's familiar to them. There's
a wink.
Yeah, the impulse to do that, to conform in humor, weirdly enough, is very powerful. Like you write a joke today about Donald Trump, it has to basically be of the format, Donald Trump's an idiot.
Right.
If you don't write it that way, then you're not, one of the cool kids, and I'm not knocking that. I think he's an idiot, but
no, you're saying the joke's too obvious.
As humor,
yeah.
It's then every now and then somebody comes along like Robert Benchley, who doesn't care what other people think is funny, doesn't care what other people are doing, doesn't care. He just trusts that his audience is going to go with him wherever he chooses to go. And that's a rare quality. And when it happens, you go, wow, that's fantastic. Like when Steve Martin first came along, when he first did his stand-up act and put an arrow through his head and stuff like that was silly, gutsy silly. And it worked. He was unbelievably successful with that. Because I think he was so willing to be so different. So it's just like,
yeah,
why is that okay to have it?
Well, nothing wrong with a good fart joke.
No,
and I see some of that in your writing. It appears so accessible that it could be misinterpreted as either juvenile or simplistic.
Or sometimes it is though.
Sometimes juvenile, but simplistic. I mean, it's not as sort of like eyebrow raising as like a Colbert report or as something like that. Like,
well, the trick is to use the fart joke when it is least appropriate or least expected. You can't just start out with fart humor. Well, I suppose you could, but if you're writing for 8-year-olds, but
say more about that. How do you use the fart humor?
Well, you use it when nobody would expect it. Like you're, I don't know. You are the faux authority, and you're discussing something, with great gravity and gravitas, and then out of nowhere a fart appears. I'm not giving a good example because
no.
Really,
I'm
saying in principle that's how you might use a fart joke.
Because you've also said in humor that the biggest mistake humor writers make is they don't end with the punchline.
Well, yeah. There's simple mechanical timing things that, it's like if you watch a stand-up comedian, a good stand-up comedian, much of what they do is timing. The same exact sentences could be funny or not funny depending on how they're being said. And obviously comedians need something funny to say too, but a big part of what a good comedian does is time, the way he says it, how it comes out. Well, in writing, you don't really have the option. The reader determines the timing. Some people might read fast, some slow, some might stop, some whatever. So you have to kind of depend on space a little bit more, and things like punctuation, which will serve, or capitalization, which will serve as emphasis and timing devices. But one of the most obvious things is if you have something funny to say, when you get to it, that's the laugh. Don't then, while the person is theoretically laughing in his mind, keep going. Don't repeat that joke. Don't go past it yet. Let him stop and laugh and enjoy what you just said. That's how in writing you do what a comedian does with timing. And a lot of people, again, I don't get it much anymore, but when I wrote for newspapers and got people wanting to write for newspapers, sending me their stuff all the time, and say, hey, people tell me this is pretty funny. What do you think? And I didn't critique people because I didn't have time.
You didn't have like a "this is crap" stamp?
No.
That's nice of you.
A lot of it was, and the reason was either that they didn't know how to stop, or they didn't realize that you can't just write the same, some variation on the same joke 800 times and call that, a humor piece. That's really the same joke repeated over and over again.
But the ending on I love this stuff. I could geek out with you about this stuff all day. I worked on a humor newspaper in my college for 4 years, the only weekly humor paper, we called it, at Queen's University. And I loved the study of humor writing. Is there another tidbit or two you'd say for people? Like, everyone listening wants to be funnier.
Yeah.
Like, everyone wants to be funnier. But so much, as you said, comedy today is derivative. Like, we are repeating jokes. It's like, hey, check out this YouTube video I got on my phone. Check out this funny thing I saw on Twitter. Check out this quote that Kelly Oxford said on a tweet. We're just channeling and filtering comedy instead of creating it.
Yeah, there's a lot. Unfortunately, there's a lot. Like, Twitter is just full of formula, So and it's easy to fall into it, where you can narrate or that formula, or
how do we get funnier?
well, first of all, I firmly believe you can't get funnier. You're either are, you're not funny. I mean,
It's like how tall you are.
I believe that all my life. Whether your brain work, it's like if you're good at math or not. I don't think you can train yourself to become good at math. You might use your ability, to understand more about it, but you would not become good at math if you weren't to begin with. But you can, with humor, put in time. And I think that's the big trap that a lot of people fall into, is they just don't. If you think that you can, in 1 hour, create 10 funny jokes, you're an idiot. If in 1 hour you might create part of one funny, and if that's what you do for a living, you might create. I'm talking about something you haven't done before,
right?
Because that's the hardest. Something you haven't done before. You have to sit there and fail over and over again in your mind and on the screen in front of you before you can succeed even a little bit. And that has been true for me for decades. Most everybody I know who writes for a living, it's true. If you just think you can, crank it out, no, you probably can't. And where I think people get confused is they look at like a talk show host, a Jimmy Kimmel or somebody like that, and they see him,
joke.
Yeah, and they don't realize that, or maybe they do, or they just don't think about it at the time, that every one of those jokes was the product probably of one guy who had 10 that didn't make that monologue.
Who is a professionally six-figure paid
that's what
comedy
he does
writer
all day long.
It's like the dude in the ad got the six-pack because he's a model.
Right. And there's a whole room full of those guys and women, I guess, to be fair. It's a male-dominated profession, but there are really funny women in it. The amount of time it takes to get one joke done that's acceptable is usually underestimated badly by people who want to get into that field.
Yeah.
So, it's not like anything other. I'm not comparing it to nuclear physics or anything. No. I'm just saying, if you see like a painting you like, or a guitar solo you like, or a comic monologue you like, recognize how much time went into that.
Of course.
Don't think because I'm a funny guy and my friends think I'm funny that you could do that, without really spending some time on it. And I think this is where a lot of writers fail utterly, and every kind of writing, but especially humor writing. They just don't put the time in.
And it seems to me, as a reader of it, that part of the value of the comedy is to be accessible. So therefore appears to be easy to create.
Oh yeah.
Because it's so accessible.
Oh yeah.
It's not like reading a textbook. You're like, I can't do that because I don't know that stuff. You're like, I could do that because I think that's funny, so I could do it.
Yeah. Or like when you watch a magician do a magic trick, or a musician play a solo. Yeah, it should look easy. If he's put enough, or she has put enough time into it, it'll look easy, but it's not easy.
It's not easy. One last question on the Benchley book before we go to your second book. One thing Robert Benchley is really famous for is maybe co-creating, or at least participating in something called the Algonquin Round Table, a group of funny people in New York City who got together for lunch apparently once a week at the Algonquin Hotel. People in the group were like Dorothy Parker, Harpo Marx, humorists, people that would play practical jokes on each other, etc. Do you think the idea of that, like the idea of the theme being friendship, the idea of that is that, there was no internet, there was nothing to bring people together. New York City is like a cultural hub. The funniest of the funniest, like, at least know each other because they're all writing articles in newspapers and stuff. What's the version of that for you, if you have one? And then today, what is that? Is it just subreddits online, or is there a version of that the in person? And I'm asking partly because I want to know what your Algonquin Round Table is, Dave, but also because I want this podcast, 3 Books, to serve as a friend for people.
Well, first of all, if I could, when that question, if you could go back to one place and one time in history, where would you pick? I've never questioned it would be the Algonquin Round Table. It does, mostly because of Robert Benchley, but also, Dorothy Parker was there and Alexander Wolcott was there, and all these people would come and go. But it doesn't, there's no equivalent now, because we're so electronically connected, the idea of, first of all, the idea of drinking in the middle of the day,
Already.
which they all were doing, into excess. And ultimately Robert Benchley killed himself drinking. But for a while there was this wonderful, ridiculous thing. They were, very funny people whose jobs were to be really funny, but also found time to get together, have a few cocktails, play incredibly elaborate practical jokes, do funny things. Robert Benchley once went onto, I can't remember which ocean liner it was, but this is a true story as far as been able to determine. He went on the, New York City, the liners would sail to England. There were no transatlantic flights then. So that's how you got there. He gets on a boat to a going away party and just stays.
Stays where?
Stays on the boat. The boat, he wasn't supposed to be going to England, but next thing he knows, he's telegraphing his wife that he's in England.
No way. By accident.
He did do that. Yeah.
It's like,
not by accident. He just was having a good time. And what the hell? And that's like, we don't do stuff like that anymore. Anyway, but so.
When you say we don't do stuff like that, what's the stuff like that?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Just what the hell, let's go for it as grown-ups, as, successful professionals.
That's too bad.
The equivalent in my life, which I think was the other part of your question, is, and it's weird, but I do have something that I view it's not quantitative. It's not even the same category really, but it feels the same. I belong to a rock band of authors.
Yes.
Called the Rock Bottom Remainders.
I saw a poster in the bathroom.
That's right.
You've made it to the can in the Books&Books.
We are on the wall, the 93 version of the Rock Bottom Remainders. And it's all authors, and nobody's really that good. A couple of the authors have some musical talent. Greg Iles, Mitch Albom, particularly Ridley Pearson. But most of us are not even.
Are you guys on the same city?
No, we live all over the country. But we every now and then get together.
Like Weezer. I
believe Weezer do that?
I believe the band Weezer.
Yeah, we're often confused with Weezer.
We're in. Our members live in different cities.
Is that a Canadian band? I'm just curious.
No.
Okay, because I forget. Oh, I think
no. They sang, Buddy
Nickelback.
Buddy Holly.
That's the Canadian.
Oh, don't come. Yeah.
Isn't that Canadian?
The best review I've ever read of an album, and by the way, I'm not going to express a strong opinion on Nickelback. Is like, if this album was worth the money that its value is created, every single customer would ask for their Nickelback. that was, and they ended on the punchline. So keep going. You're in this rock band. Mitch album. What does he play?
He plays keyboards, and he does an Elvis impersonation. Amy Tan's in it. Scott Turow. These are serious authors, we get together.
I didn't get the remainder reference until now, like the remainders of a book.
Right, book remainders. Well, you probably haven't got any remainders. You sell very well, so. But that's what we do. We get together and we make music, but because it's like not serious, we can't be serious. I mean, we kind of try to remember what chord we're supposed to play. So in the moment, we can be sometimes serious, but most of the time, the whole concept is so ridiculous, and we are so non-skilled that it's this it's just fun. It's
Who's the singer?
Well, we all sing different songs,
and these are original.
I sing a song called "Proofreading Woman."
Proofreading Woman.
Yeah, it's the only love song I know of that was written about a proofreading woman. But the chorus is, "She never says between you and I." That's how much he loves her. But we have fun, and it's not doesn't advance our careers. Well, I guess it doesn't.
It made Mitch huge. It made Mitch huge.
He was
Tuesdays with Maurey was nothing.
He was nothing till he joined the Remainders. That was true though. Stephen King, who has been in the band and hasn't been in a few years, but you never know with this band who's going to show up. Pointed out once, this is back we were touring in the late 90s. He said, the best-selling author in his band, I'm no longer the best-selling author in his band. It's because Tuesdays with Maurey was at the time, like if you walked on a plane, they would have to throw 50 copies off just so the plane could take off. There were so many copies of Tuesdays with Maurey on every plane.
I read it in my undergrad leadership course as a prescribed reading textbook. So that's
unfortunately it's short. It's a short book.
That was good for prescribed reading curriculum.
Anyway,
so Stephen King was in the band too.
Yeah. Stephen is one of the founding members of the Rock Bottom Remainders, And
But you guys kicked him out? What happened?
no, it kind of like we sort of said we were going to stop. I think it was about at the 20-year mark, but we are so bad. I mean, we can't start songs together. We can't end songs together. We apparently cannot even break up as a band together. So after a couple of years, we got back together here or somewhere. We just played in Tucson at the Tucson Festival of Books. Quite a few of us were there, in fact, and it was highly successful in the sense that I don't know how you would define success for our band, but we got together.
And it created what we were talking about, which is friendship and an Algonquin roundtable like atmosphere.
That's really where I was getting. This is something where, authors, it's a solitary thing. And I think more so than it ever used to be. You're sitting in front of your screen and, you communicate by email and social media, and, you don't hang out with people. It's not collaborative at all. So to do something where, you're all trying to do it together and you're bad at it brings you, brings you close together and makes for a lot of fun, a lot of humor.
Totally. My friend Michael Bungay Stanier, also an author of The Coaching Habit, has a great quote, which I'm going to butcher, but it's something like, never trust a biography that has only successes. So part of me in the back of my mind just wished that Stephen King, who I'd love to have on the show, had a Wikipedia entry that said at the bottom, was unfortunately kicked out of the rock bottom remainders.
Well, I will say is if it makes you feel any better, he's not that good at guitar.
Oh, that does make me feel a little bit better.
Okay.
But I have a ton of respect for him and his work.
He's much more fun than you might suspect. He's he's obviously a smart guy, but he's a really funny guy.
I kind of got that from his Entertainment Weekly columns. Remember all those columns he used to write on the back page of the Entertainment Weekly? Yeah.
But he would sing some of our songs. He would just sing the teenage death anthems.
Death anthem.
He would take liberties. Like one night we were doing a song called Last Kiss, which is about
not to be confused with the Pearl Jam song.
No, isn't it?
Oh, Pearl Jam cover. Oh, sorry. It's a Pearl Jam cover of the same song. So
I believe it was.
Yeah, the Where, oh, where will my baby be? That song? Sorry, that's not going to get on Spotify or Shazam properly.
But anyway, he's saying, this was the moment after the car crash in the song. And he goes, when I awoke, she was lying there. I brushed her liver from my hair.
Oh, my God.
So that's Stephen. And it's hard to keep playing when, he's singing because you're laughing so hard.
The best scenes in Saturday Night Live are always where the cast is about to crack up.
Exactly.
Though. So that must have made it great for the fans. What a great story that is. And I love talking to you about humor and comedy and formative books. It's a nice transition to our second book, which is Very Good Jeeves, one of a series, as you pointed out, of Jeeves books written by P.G. Wodehouse, who lived from 1881 to 1955. This is a fictional book published in 1930 by Doubleday Doran, if I'm getting that right. And P.J. Wodehouse was an English writer who lived 50 years in England and 30 years in the United States. And in the middle was a brief time in France when he was captured by the Germans and was a prisoner of war in World War II.
Which was a very controversial part of his life that haunted him for the rest of his life.
Oh, interesting. And after that, he never set foot in England again, it said too.
Well, what happened is he was kind of a naive guy. And he was known for, he wrote these, the book you pick is actually a collection of short stories, but he wrote, his main character was a guy named Bertie Wooster, who was a, twit, an upper class twit, not a very bright guy. This is the voice that P.G. Wodehouse writes through with a really smart, savvy butler named Jeeves. And
like an Alfred in Batman. Yes. Or for Bruce Wayne.
Except Bruce Wayne was not theoretically he could beat the crap out of him. Bertie Wooster couldn't do anything competently at all. And Bertie just kind of floats through life, getting into endless problems. He's always getting engaged to women he doesn't love. And he's, had to get out of the engagement. And these, what makes P.G. Wodehouse wonderful is these plots are fantastically complicated. And there's all these characters, each with their own, each with his own, motive in the plot, and somehow he would tie it all together in the end. But the narration is what makes P.G. Wodehouse wonderful. Is this kind of clueless upper class twit describing things the way he does, and somehow you the reader feel much smarter than him, and yet, you're vastly entertained by the way he describes things. So anyway, that was P.G. Wodehouse's.
Well, they said, at least when I say they, I mean like my research for this said that he would sometimes take a year or two to come up with even just the plot for a book with over 400 pages of notes, which is astounding.
Yeah, he was said to have, and when I wrote a couple novels, and they don't read anything like a P.J. Wodehouse novel, but the one element that I patterned after him was the idea of multiple characters pursuing multiple plot lines, and they're somehow interweaving. I could never do it with the skill that he did it with, but he was said to have he would have pieces of paper taped to the wall all around where the study where he worked, and they would start low until he could work them where he wanted, and he would raise them higher and higher on the wall till he had them where he wanted them. But he had this, and you have to do that to keep a plot going, to organize it.
So I don't understand that. So I'm picturing this because I'm fascinated by people who are able to write fiction. You just comment on your own fiction. I can't even, I feel like that's out of my realm of ability, right? For me. What do you do on the wall? Can you paint that out for me? Did you do something similar?
Yes. Okay, here's my very simple Dave Barry view of literature and all fiction. Summarize what is good and what is bad. And this is my view. This is not a popular view. This is certainly not the academic
we came here to talk to you.
View. I like stories. I like good stories where there's a beginning and an end, and stuff happens. I love that. And I think most people do. This is now considered in the world of academia, as far as I can tell, really pathetic and
an actual story.
Crude. You'd have a story.
The local bookstore
instead of writing about all the things that are wrong with the world, and
I see
how. You don't have to have a story. You just have to
a meditation on.
Oh yeah,
that whole framework. And there's actually a section at the local bookstore near my house, a type bookstore in Toronto, that's called Plotless Fiction. Which controversial section, but they have a lot of books and they love it, and it's an interesting section. So you're saying, no, go back to the story.
I like to have a story.
Something's got to happen.
Something should happen. That's my view. And but what is the question, and how are you going to make it happen? And is it going to be satisfying at the end or not? To do that, you have to resist the most powerful temptation of all, which is to start writing. What you really want to do when you're going to write a novel is you've got a really rough idea. It's this guy who wants to take his son to every baseball park in America, or some story like that, and you just start writing it. But at some point you'll either run into unsolvable plot dilemmas, or you'll have no plot at all. It'll just meander. Either way, it won't be a satisfying experience for the reader. And then you have to go back and rewrite the whole thing. So the real trick I found, and not to set myself up as a great fiction writer, but for me anyway, the trick is to have the whole, thing, to figure out where it's going to end, how it's going to end, and why that will be a satisfactory resolution. Why the bad guy will ultimately suffer, or whatever you want to have happen to him. Why the good guy will ultimately triumph, or whatever. At least figure that out roughly ahead of time before you start writing anything. P.G. Wodehouse did that brilliantly. So he was able, with this incredibly elaborate structure he created.
What are on the cards?
Intricate plot points.
They're plot points.
Here's what happens. Here's what happens. Here's what happens.
Ah, okay.
And then he was able. Here's the tea service that's missing. And this scene is actually going to appear over here, and that's how it got there. And now, Lord, what's his name is going to discover this, but he's going to think Lady what's her name did it. And at the same moment, Agatha is going to discover that Bertie doesn't really want to marry her, and that kind of thing. Where that's what he did. He could then, with his incredibly intricate edifice of plot, storyline created, he could then have this Bertie Wooster butterfly come along and describe it all in this, clueless, foppish way. And he had a great gift for language, Wodehouse, and for, how the Brits would, a wonderful ear for expressions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, Christopher Hitchens on the back of the book says he's the gold standard of English wit.
Yeah.
From Christopher Hitchens,
Christopher
an incredible
Hitchens, who's
writer.
the smartest human being I have ever met personally in my life. I was terrified once. I was on the Bill Maher show back when it was called
Politically Incorrect.
Politically Incorrect. And I get there, and like the other guests are, one of them was a rapper. I don't remember which one. He came with like an entourage of 47 people, and ended up said fewer words total than the number of people in his entourage on the show. But then Christopher, and then I can't remember. Oh yeah, Vicky, what's her name? Who was on the Carol Burnett show and sang "That's the Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia." Some judge, and Christopher Hitchens, who I'd always just thought was fantastically smart guy, and he is. He's smarter in person even than he is, And like the first thing he says to me is, "Let's go get a cigarette." Well, I don't smoke, but he did, which is what killed him ultimately, unfortunately. But we go outside, and he's got a drink in one hand, a cigarette in the other. He was just exactly the hard drinking, smoking, brilliant Englishman you want. But I resolved then and there that whatever whatever I said in that show, I was going to be agreeing with Mr. Hitchens. I'm not going to be on the other side of any argument from this man.
That's funny.
And I was glad. I mean, then I ended up getting to know him a little bit, and in fact, got together with him a few times socially. And when he came to Miami promoting his last book,
Mortality,
the one about his
God is not great.
No, it was not an atheism book. It was his autobiography. It was
Hitch 22.
Yeah,
sorry, Hitch 22. He was on book tour where he discovered he had
the last
cancer.
The last event he did was here in Miami for Books&Books, and my job was to introduce him.
Oh wow!
And
that was his last book event.
And
ever.
I did not know that night that he already knew, but we sat in the back of it was at a synagogue near here. And
the event was at a synagogue?
Yeah, it was because they use it because it has a lot of space and
somewhat ironic given his strongly atheist tendencies.
Yeah, well, and he discussed that too. But anyway, that we're digressing a little bit. Anyway,
no. I like this digression. This is really important.
Christopher Hitchens.
You introduced Christopher. I actually don't mind pausing here, Dave, because you introduced Christopher Hitchens at his last ever bookstore event when he knew he had terminal cancer, which he then wrote one of my favorite books, Mortality, which was a series of Vanity Fair articles kind of congealed into a book called Mortality, which is incredibly eye-opening. We'll put all these references, by the way, in our show notes. So listeners who are, what's that book? We'll have a list. Yeah. Can you just go into that moment for a second and your relationship with Christopher and what you guys may have done kind of before or after that, and just say a little bit there, because this will be probably the only time in my life I get to talk to someone who had that experience with someone like Christopher Hitchens. Can you just say a little bit about him?
Okay. Well, I remember, again, I'd met him a few times. We were like nodding acquaintances, and he had said some very nice things, like his sons liked to read. He could quote my columns because he could quote anybody to anybody. But so he actually, the first time I met him, quoted some things I'd written, and I was like, wow, Christopher Hitchens. And he said, yes, my sons think you're funny for an American, or something like that.
Hilarious that he didn't say me. No, he's like specifically my
kind
children.
Of like was
my
in,
children.
In a Hitchish way, acknowledging that.
Yeah.
But I remember we anyway. So we know each other, and I had gotten his book because Mitchell Kaplan had asked me to introduce him, and I read it, and I just saw one of the things in the book that one of the main points of the book is his mother committed suicide, and my mother committed suicide as it happened. So we get to the synagogue where we're drinking scotch in the back, and he didn't say anything about being sick, but I think he knew. And anyway, he said, "Well, thank you so much for introducing my book. I'm sure you haven't had time to read it." And I said, "Actually, I did read it," and he was like genuinely happy, because I don't think anybody on the whole book tour had read his book. It had just come out, and
it's like 400 pages,
right? Yeah. And I said, I just want you to know, I was really interested in the part about your mom. My mom committed suicide also. I said, really? And so then he decided that we needed to have a conversation on stage. I was prepared to just introduce him. And my introduction was funny. It was supposed to be funny anyway. I just began something like a genius, a brilliant voice, a once in a generation talent. I have been called all of these things, but Christopher, So anyway, I'm trying to go for the light. And
could have been a good time for a fart joke, but you skipped that one.
Anyway, he came out, and he wanted to have a conversation about his book, his mother, and he wanted me to talk about my mother and his, but the audience was hardcore atheists, because God, at that time he was probably the number one spokesperson for atheism. And they wanted that's a very rabid group. I am myself an atheist, I should say. I'm not one who goes around saying, "Hey, you believe in God? You're an idiot." But there's a segment of that in the atheism community. Not Christopher, but anyway, that's what they came to hear. That's what they wanted to talk about. It very quickly became clear they didn't want to hear either me talk about his mother, or certainly not me talk about my mother. So I kind of bowed out of the
on stage.
Yeah, I said, look, why not? I think people want to ask you questions directly, and why don't we go that direction? He understood, read the crowd. That's what they wanted. And then he tried valiantly to keep steering it back to Hitch 22. And at one point I remember saying, I asked you, can we talk about, but it was a disappointed evening, I guess, for him. It was, and I always felt bad that was his last, he'd been sort of shoehorned into, you're the atheist, at least for that night.
It got to be like he was the spokesperson for something that he was now moving forward in his life.
And I think he was used to that, but I think, in his mind, he was way more than that, in large part because of 9/11 and the, and the whole, concern about Islam. He had been kind of pushed in the position of, you're the guy who attacks Islam, and I'm the guy who defends Islam, and let's have that debate.
Oh.
And I think he was always a lot more than that as a writer and as a thinker. But that
and he changed his views a lot, like a lot of people do. But he was notable for changing many of his views as he got more informed.
Yes, and it was very hard to pigeonhole him politically. Yeah, which was one of the things that made him a smart guy.
There's that quote, strong opinions weakly held, which Mark Andreessen says, but also it's referred to by a lot of people, but that is an epitome of someone with a strong mind.
Mm-hmm.
Roger Martin, the former dean of Rotman School of Business, where I'm from in Toronto, has a similar thing called integrated thinking, or the idea of the opposable mind. You can have two kind of competing views, and he did. That's why I think it's worth the digression. Is his last event, before he kind of stopped doing this, you introduced him, you're on stage with him. So thank you for sharing that story with us.
And I'm pretty sure that was his last, right after that, the tour was canceled, and then the rest was kind of sad. But anyway, he loved P.G. Wodehouse, as does pretty much every British person I've ever met. He had Wodehouse had a genius with the language. He did have this really kind of sad second chapter of his life. What happened was he was living in France.
P.J. Wodehouse did?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was living in France. And I hope I get the history here right. I hope that people listening look into it more, because it's kind of a fascinating story. But he was living in France. He was a very successful novelist.
They say he moved there because of tax reasons.
Yeah, but
it was pre-discovery of Cayman Islands.
Yeah, but he was still very much a Brit. And then the Germans came and invaded, and he didn't leave, because he thought it was going to be okay. A lot of people kind of thought it was a temporary thing. It wasn't going to be any big deal. And all of a sudden he's captured by the Germans. And the Germans, again, this is my recollection of it, they realized that he is a potentially valuable asset. He's this very well-known English writer who didn't flee. And they decided to kind of use him. And they set him up in this, I don't know if you call it a prison camp, but he was living
internment camp, they said,
reasonably comfortably.
Oh, okay.
And they have him making broadcasts, and in which he's basically saying, well, they're treating me reasonably well, it's not something. And I don't think he ever crossed a line of saying, they're really, I agree with the Nazis or anything like that. But he didn't come off as, these bastards, they've invaded. He was kind of being what he always was, kind of like this easygoing guy who lived a comfortable life and whatever. He was very naive, extremely naive about how this was going to be perceived in the country that felt it was any moment going to be invaded by the Germans.
Right.
So even though to the end of his life, to the end of the lives of people around him, he never ever was a Nazi. He never ever really, agreed with him or anything. He just didn't know what he was.
And he was a prisoner.
He was a prisoner, but he didn't. He knew he couldn't leave, but there was always kind of presented to him, I think, as sort of like, this is just a legal thing. We can't let you go right now, but don't worry, everything's going to be fine. The Germans were very careful how they treated him, and they were clever how they used him. But anyway, his voice got broadcast back to England, at a time when nobody in England wanted to hear anything nice at all about the Germans. So he was viciously, and maybe justifiably because he was pretty naive, viciously attacked in England as a traitor. And when the war was over, he was just not welcome back in England. So he came to the United States, where he lived out a comfortable life and wrote more books and was a reasonably successful guy. It wasn't like it was the end of the world for him, but it was kind of sad. I don't think he ever went back to England. I don't know.
No, he never set foot in England again, according to the research. And interesting, because it's a nice tie also to the Robert Benchley story, because Benchley also did radio interviews during the war, was also castigated as a...
He was more of a pacifist.
He's more of a pacifist.
Because of his brother's death, he was always kind of anti-war. But like if you could read a million Robert Benchley essays and never notice that. I think it was
right. But it's still with Benchley. It just talks about the era we live in. Like you talked about being unpopular in comedy or being risky to be silly. Like humor is a device that we use as shields as well. And here are these guys with somewhat strong opinions that were not popular opinions.
Right.
We can look back at them and from a progressive standpoint say like it's good that he was peaceful or he's peace oriented. How is that a bad thing? That's a good thing.
And they were both kind of naive, gentle men. Yeah. It's hard to picture either one of them having ever had a hostile thought. Anyway.
No, I love this. I love the stories. And, I wanted to talk to you about a theme in this book, Dave, about patience. Because I had trouble reading Very Good Jeeves. I had trouble. And because I kept getting distracted. My mind kept wandering. You talked about how intricate the plots are. And I had trouble following them.
Well, you picked the wrong book. You're reading a book of short stories.
I should have read
it. His better books are the full-length novels where you get kind of caught up in this one long story. I agree with this. Short stories, if you don't already like P.G. Wodehouse, or you're not already a fan, they're not going to strike you as what made him wonderful was these intricate plots.
Which one do you recommend? Because maybe we can
Carry On Jeeves.
Carry On Jeeves. Okay. Very good Jeeves, Carry On Jeeves. You can imagine how when I bought them, I didn't know anything about either of them. But I was going to talk to you about patience because I'm like, do we have patience anymore to read books like this?
Well, do we have patience to read books anymore? I wonder. I never get a straight answer from my publishers. Maybe you do, about how is the book business doing? Obviously there's some fiction that just gets devoured. If John Grisham writes a book, it gets devoured. If Stephen King
something turns into a movie, it's popularized often.
And the horrible books like 50 Shades of Grey you sell in the trillions. So people will read certain kinds of things, but like that wasn't really a book. That was like softcore porn. And then just wondering did people just read like, I want to go to a bookstore and find a good book by an author I haven't read yet. Does that happen much?
So on this show, Dave, we're called 3 books, and on each chapter, we only have 333 chapters total. So you're one of the 333 because it's 3 books a show, and that's about 1,000 books. Okay, we are popularizing it. We feel like, as in terms of all mediums right now, when talking about art, movies, music, television, only books have a percentage analog increasing. Like
is that right?
Yeah, only books have the percentage. So people have their e-readers and it's kind of ditch them a little bit. We need breaks from screens. I was in a bar the other night and a woman was at the bar. It's like, 10, 11 o'clock at night. It's a dim lighting. She's having a drink. She's there by herself. She's reading a book at the bar, and I thought it looked beautiful. I'm a happily married man. For anyone
you
listening,
wanted to go over and marry her,
but I was like, that is my kind of lady. Sitting in a bar reading a book in the candlelight. And I said that to her. I was like, wow, that's amazing that you're reading a book. And she's like, yeah. And then we started talking. Turns out she's 24, by the way. Art history major. And she's like, yeah. And we got talking. Doesn't have a cell phone. And I wonder, and I was like, why don't you have a cell phone? She's like, none of my friends do. We're sick of it. They're too expensive. Everyone's addicted to screens.
Let's hope this trend catches up.
This is a new trend.
Have you been on a plane? You're on a plane today. You get on a plane and it used to be I mean, I'm talking not that long, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, everybody on a plane pulled out a book.
Exactly.
When it took off. Now,
Yeah.
if you see one person with a book, it's unusual, I think. Everybody has a screen. Half the people are looking at their phones. I'm not even sure what they're looking at on their phones. I thought you were supposed to turn your phone off. But anyway.
Weirdest thing happened to me the other day on a plane, Dave. It's a long flight, Toronto to Vancouver. The woman sitting next to me the whole time on the plane, sitting next to me, is on the phone, not checking her phone, but like,
and
hey,
they never came over and said, "Lady."
No,
how did that work?
She was using like the call feature through the Wi-Fi through the WhatsApp,
so
and she was
Skype.
like, hey, but she was like, hey, what, you want to get together on Friday? He's like, oh no, it's Sam's birthday, and she's like, yeah, no, I'm on a plane right now, but I was like, you're on a plane. And so I sit next to her for 5 hours. She's on the phone the whole time.
Oh, that would make me crazy. And you didn't say anything. Of course,
she was
you're a nice person.
being quiet and respectful, and trying her best to be quiet. But it's her freedom, and I wasn't going to. What's the word? Impinge? What's the word? I wasn't going to be like, you can't do that, because there's a no smoking sign, but there's not a no cell phone sign. It's not like the customs line where there's no cell phones allowed. So I like the idea of cell phone free zones, and of course, when you're listening to this show, you're not doing anything else. You might be doing a workout or driving a long drive, but you are listening to the theater of the mind that we are, together, like you, me, and the person listening are having a conversation.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like, when I get out of the bathroom on a plane and I walk back down to my seat, I look at the percentages. I feel like I see more books now than I did a couple years ago.
Well,
I feel like there's something
heartened
coming.
to hear that.
Yeah, but we need good books. And that's why we'll talk about your third and final book, which is The Dog of the South by Charles Portis, written in 1979. Portis is best known probably for his book True Grit, because like we talked about, it was made into two movies, a movie in the 70s and a more recent Coen Brothers film. This is a novel, one big novel, unlike the other two, which are a comedy article and short stories. This is one big novel about Ray Midge tracking down his wife, Norma, who has run off with her first husband. He follows their credit card receipts from his credit card, and the trail leads from Arkansas down to Mexico and into Honduras. Eventually, at the end of the book, actually, you know what? I'm not going to say it so that people that are
don't give away the end.
people that are intrigued by it can pick it up. I know it's 1979, but spoiler will apply here. I won't say how it finishes, but I love how it finishes.
Yeah, me too.
So it's a story.
Charles
Tell us
Portis,
about your relationship.
Okay, I discovered Charles Portis through a member of my band, Roy Blunt Jr., one of the funniest humans on the planet, and Roy was the one who told me. I never heard of Charles Portis.
Like me, when you told me this book, I never heard of Charles Portis.
It turns out he's a cult following, and almost everybody who follows him loves humor. This guy is one of the most brilliant deadpan humor writers ever. I'm very reluctant to say too much about it, just because it's such a delight when you pick it up. But he's when I talked earlier about not being afraid to be different, this is the most unique voice I know of in modern American comedy writing, the way Charles Portis writes. One of the things that when you write fiction, I know I do, and the fiction I read is you tend to want to write coherently, like what would be the logical thing to say here? Now say this, and then this, and I'll advance the plot in this way. But people really in the world don't usually, many people don't do that. People, they have wildly inappropriate or ridiculous thoughts, make ridiculous statements all the time. And Charles Portis is just able to reproduce that just so beautifully. In this case, Ray Midge, the protagonist and narrator of this, is completely batshit crazy.
Totally.
But he doesn't know it. And and the way Charles very calmly describes his thought process, like when he sits down at the bar, he drinks the beer left-handed because he figures most people are right-handed, and therefore they're more likely to, their lips who have been on that side of the glass. He's going to go the other way. But he describes that as that's a thoughtful thing to do. Anyway, but he also just has this. He's just a good writer, and he's so aware of writing. And the funniest single line, I'm going to read it because I printed it out just so I can read it here. The funniest line I think I've ever read about writing, that could have only been written by a master writer who pays a lot of attention to writing. And in this case, Charles Portis used to work for a newspaper, and for a while his job was to redact and edit the writing of a bunch of basically housewife correspondents in like somewhere in Arkansas who would send in notes from their social club, written in very flowery prose. And he had to sort of convert that to, newspaper prose. So he's just very aware of how
to edit too.
And
you're pulling out a piece of paper now for people that obviously can't see us. We're sitting at this big table in this huge art room inside Books and Books. Dave has put on his glasses. He's got a folded piece of paper. He's pulled out of his, pocket. And I cannot wait to hear your favorite line.
So this is Ray Midge has finally tracked down his Melba, his wife, who ran away with this guy, and she's been writing a lot of stories, and she's a buxom redheaded woman, and she's written many stories, all of which feature a buxom redheaded woman who solves crimes. And anyway, this is Ray Midge, the husband, describing the writing style of Melba, his wife. Melba had broken the transition problem wide open by starting almost every paragraph with "moreover." She freely used the former and the latter, and every time I ran into one of them, I had to backtrack to see whom she was talking about. She was also fond of "inasmuch" and "crestfallen." When I read that opening line of breaking the transition problem wide open by starting every paragraph, because everybody who writes deals with transition.
Right. How do you start something in a different, fresh way?
And how brilliant to start every new paragraph with "moreover." Anyway, that still remain. I may never read anything about writing that strikes me as funny as that.
That's funny.
Paragraph
That's
does.
Funny and beautiful. And he's only written a few novels. He
wrote
five. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all great. I mean, I picked Dog of the South because I love it. The first one I read is called Masters of Atlantis, which is a hilarious story of two guys who. A guy basically ends up in this kind of secret society, kind of like the, what are the secret societies?
Skull and Bones?
But no, more like a lodge where you can join. And, But they have, not the Elks maybe, but like that where you...
Davos, YPO, I don't know.
Yeah, like that. But you can join and learn certain...
mastermind groups.
Secret things. And, anyway, these... And it's again completely ridiculous from the start. It's clear that it's ridiculous. It's clear to everybody except the people in the book itself. And he's so good at letting that let them carry on absolutely cluelessly and just writing what they would think. That's a wonderful book. The True Grit, which is his most famous book, and is also a wonderful book. It's the one everybody knows.
I like that you didn't go with that because we have one of our values on the show is no movie covers, no exception.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why, but it's actually not my favorite, although it's really a wonderful book. The interesting thing about Charles Portis, two things. He's still alive, I believe.
From Arkansas, lives in Little Rock, I think.
Lives in Little Rock and is not like, he's always described as reclusive. He doesn't hide from anybody. You could go contact him, presumably.
Reclusive / no one goes to Little Rock. Is that what they're saying?
But no, he just doesn't. He doesn't promote himself. He really is a godlike figure among certain. Just this certain small cadre of people, most of whom are writers.
You turned me on to him, Dave. I mean, of the 3 books you recommended, I loved the
the other 2 are more of an acquired taste from my childhood.
But I loved the Benchleys. But this guy, I'm now because I love this book so much. I'm like, I want to go through the catalog of the 5 novels. As
you will, and then you'll do what I did, which is you'll regret that he didn't write anymore, and then you'll do what I have started doing lately. Start reading them again because they're so quirky.
Yeah,
that you forget, you're going, oh my God, I forgot that line. It's so good. So,
well, somebody compared the protagonist in Dog of the South to Confederacy of Dunces.
Yeah. Okay.
You know that
I would say the closest to Charles Portis, different style, but yeah, again, a very quirky.
And that book, by John Kennedy O'Toole, is most often compared to my favorite novel of my whole life, which I don't know if you've read or heard of, which is called A Fraction of the Whole by Steve Toltz.
I have not read that.
If you have not read that, Dave, I'm going to buy it for you today before we leave Books and Books because it's my favorite novel.
Okay.
Trying desperately to get Steve Toltz on the show.
A Fraction of the Whole. He's still alive.
WHOLE. It's his debut novel. It was nominated for the Man Booker. He's Australian. It's the funniest, fastest paced, craziest, coolest book.
Count me in.
So, 2 themes come out for me from there, and then we're going to wrap up with a couple fast money round questions if you have a couple more minutes. And one is, I want to talk to you about ambition, because you're hugely successful. You've got tons of New York Times bestsellers. You've written, by my count, over 40 books, fiction, nonfiction, Peter Pan prequels. You've popularized International Talk Like the Pirate Day. You've got, what is it, a sewage plant in North Dakota?
Sewage lifting.
So, my apologies. A sewage lifter.
They leave there. I would leave it down there, but they lift it.
They lift their sewage. Oh, that's a great comeback. In North Dakota. Yet you also have, I won't call them failures, I won't call them flops, but you're in a band that's not popular, as you said. You've talked about remainders. And you try lots of new things because, as you say, I've heard you say in the past, you get bored quickly and you want to try new things. So talk to me about ambition versus contentment. How do you wrestle with the things that don't do well? Where do you put new ideas in your catalog now of success? Can you open that up for us? A lot of people listening, including me, if you have success, you want more. How do you get contentment? What's that look like?
I will say that, anybody who writes wants people to buy his books. You'd wish every book would be a bestseller, that sort of thing. You want attention. That's why you write. But this is going to sound self-serving, but I mean it. I've always wanted to be happy, and I wanted to, be interested in what I was doing, enjoy what I was doing, and let the success come from that. I don't like seeing ambition, having that become like the driving force. And I'm talking about in any art form, acting, music, whatever. I like it when I feel like the person who's doing that is really enjoying doing that. Not that person really, most important thing is that person get my attention. So, and I think you're happier that way too, because then if you don't succeed the way you want to, you can still say, well, at least I was happy doing it. Mm-hmm. I got some contentment from it. But I mean, I'm not going to betray confidences, but I know people who are, by any standard you could measure, successful at what they do and not happy at all because they're not as successful as they want to be. And that's not a great way to live.
No,
it's just not.
It's so not. We don't have any ads on this show, 3 Books. People ask me, why are you doing this if you're not doing it for any form of revenue at all? And I say, because I really want to read 1,000 formative books of 333 people that I find inspirational. The end. It's a self-serving thing because I know I'll love it. Mm-hmm. Fast money round questions to close us off. How do you organize your books at home?
Michelle does, my wife. And then I say, Michelle, where's the guy I wanted just the other day to find The Dog of the South, because I wanted to get this quote out of it. I said, where would that be? Of course, she knows. I don't know how she knows, but she knows.
So your organization strategy is through my wife's brain.
Michelle, yeah.
That's great. What's your favorite bookstore and why? Obviously, you could talk about this one
right here. We're in it.
Why?
Any independent bookstore.
Why.
But because, this is the community, and Mitchell Kaplan's obsession is that it be local, it be part of the community, and he does everything he can to make that happen. If you write a book, if you're local, he will, you will have an event here, and he will get people to come listen to you talk. And that's really rare, with books. No chain will do that, for a local author. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but you won't see that much here. That's standard operating procedure. And as I say, every night there's music, there's food, there's people coming here, just for other reasons who end up, getting into books because of it. And we never come here. I just watched my wife buying books as we were talking. We never come here and don't buy some books.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And sometimes a salad, like we both did today. What is your white whale book, or the book you have wanted to read the longest but haven't, or maybe the book that has defeated you?
The Brothers Karamazov. When I was in college, I was in some literature class. It wasn't even Russian literature, but we were supposed to read the Brothers Karamazov, and I had been told my whole.
Who wrote that? I don't know it.
Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Okay, I should know it.
Been told my whole. He was bigger when I was in college than he is now. I don't know why that is, but
because you could spell back then.
Yeah, it's like anyway. He. Everybody says this is genius. He's brilliant. And I was determined that I was going to like him as much as all my smart friends claimed to. Now I think they all lied. Nobody ever read. I don't think Fyodor Dostoevsky finished the Brothers Karamazov. I think the last 80 or 90 pages are probably blank. He just gave up. But
no one knows because no one's got
I ended up passing a course where I theoretically read it, and I never got halfway through that book.
That's hilarious.
It was hard going.
What is one thing books do for you which nothing else does?
Take me away. You can't, there is no movie, there's no song, this is a cliche. I know it. I realize I'm saying a cliche, but there is no comparable mental activity like being really into a book. And I don't know why that is. There's just nothing in front of you but, figures on a piece of paper, which maybe is part of it. There's just so little going on that it's all in your brain, all of it. Whereas if you're watching a screen, you're somewhat aware that it's on the screen, the sound around you. But when you're reading, nothing's even moving. So, except your eye, I guess. So you get so wrapped up in it in a way that still to this day, and I have no experience that compares to that.
You're coloring the characters in, you're picturing the rooms, everything. 2 more and then we're done. If you could delete it from your brain, what book would you most want to read again for the first time?
For the first
like if
time.
you could delete it from your brain to have like, I wish I could read it, but I can't because I've read it. Like what would you most want to read for the first time? Because it was such a satisfying first time reading experience. I'm saying apologies to I'm sorry.
Michelle's she's over here tapping her fingers.
Okay, not the Sonic the Hedgehog foot tapping.
I just gave you credit for organizing our book. He said, "How do I organize my books at home?" And I said, "I don't. Michelle does."
Through my wife's brain. How do you organize them, Michelle?
They're organized by kind of like this: fiction, nonfiction, travel, biography.
All the books written by people we know are in.
Oh yeah, we do have one whole bookshelf of all books written by
people you know. So it's the do not throw out shelf.
We have hundreds of
in case
books.
they come over.
Well, when we come here to a book signing, we always get a book signed. So we have books signed by a lot of people. And anyway, Michelle puts all those in one place.
That's all in one place, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
That's smart.
If you could delete it from your brain.
Okay, one book I could delete and read again.
Again for the first time.
I'm going to say Catch-22 just because I remember loving it a lot. And then, now I feel like I know the plot. I know where it's going. So I probably wouldn't. But I remember just thinking how amazing it was the first time I read it. And just funny book.
Fantastic. And my very last question, with everything we've talked about, and I so appreciate your time and your wisdom. You're a phenomenal writer. You have also taught writing, and sometimes you've taught it to business people.
I did.
And I've heard you talk about all the mistakes they make, which is like, it's fine to end with a proposition and best regards and all this crap that they put in business writing. So can you share a piece or two of general wisdom you would share for people, which I think is everybody, who want to write better, however they are writing today?
Yeah, be direct. I think that there's an obsession with trying to sound literary, and it just never, it affects almost every kind of writing. I dealt with it all the time when I was teaching effective business writing. I would say people aren't really interested in your educational level, or they don't want to be impressed by you. They just want to know what it is you're trying to tell them. And that's certainly true of business writing, but I think it's also true of literary writing. I mean, there are a lot of very pretentious people writing, really obscure prose. And I don't know why. If you can't tell me what it is you're trying to say in a way that I can understand, why should I care what it is? If you're not interested in communicating it to me. And that said, every now and then you encounter some genius who, just crafts a sentence that
Christopher Hitchens.
It's beautiful and amazing. But that's not most people. Most people don't have that ability. Don't pretend you do. If you have something interesting to say it. That's be my main piece of advice.
Dave Barry, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed it. All right.
Thank you.
And now I have to go.
And now I have to go. Did you hear Dave at the very end there as I was shutting off the microphone saying, and now I have to go? He was like, and now I have to go pee. And he scrambled off to the bathroom in the Books&Books there in Coral Gables. I loved his closing thought. Be direct. Stop trying to sound literary. There's a lot of very pretentious people writing obscure prose. This guy's a Pulitzer Prize winner, right? Dave Barry is a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. He's written a syndicated column through hundreds and thousands of newspapers for decades. Yet when you talk to him, when you listen to him, did you not feel like I did? Like you were just hanging out with a buddy? Like you were just hanging out with a friend who was accessible and down to earth and chill. That's the kind of wisdom I hope we can touch into more and more and more on 3 books from very interesting, eccentric, and notable people sometimes, but it comes to us in a down to earth, on the couch, chilling in the basement kind of way. if you've made it this far in the podcast, I'd like to welcome you back into the End of the Podcast Club. This is one of 2 clubs that we have for $3. The other one, of course, is only accessible. The password is only accessible by our phone number. So if you call me at 1-833-READ-A-LOT, 1-833-READ-A-LOT, you may get a secret password invitation to the second club. But End of the Podcast Club is the first club. It's the more well-known club. It's the club that people are starting to come up to me and talk to me about. Like, hey, I'm in the End of the Podcast Club. I'm listening in. I'm wondering if I should leave a voicemail or a review. That's great. We love hearing from you. We love going to the phones. And so let's start this chapter by hitting the phones now.
Hi, Neil. This is Jim calling from Ashcroft, BC. Today at work, I listened to all the available chapters of 3 books. And I have to say, I was completely transfixed and inspired by what I heard. I wanted to thank you for putting so much care into an excellent podcast. I really appreciate that you're conducting the interviews in person, too. I think it makes such a difference to the audio quality and to the whole listening experience. And your talk with Judy Blume made me remember reading to my kids when they were younger, which is something I really miss. And I didn't even realize how much I missed that. I read some of those books so many times that I still remember parts of them, like Slinky Malinky was blacker than black, a stalking and lurking adventurous cat. He had bright yellow eyes and a warbling wail, and a kink at the end of his very long tail. And it would go on from there. Anyway, thanks so much, and I'm looking forward to the full moon in a couple of days. Bye-bye now.
Thank you so much, Jim, from Ashcroft, BC, for that beautiful, loving, touching voicemail. I honestly can't tell you guys enough how much it means to me to be able to connect with you voice to voice, person to person like this. I Googled Ashcroft, BC, Jim, by the way, just to find out where exactly you are. And I zoomed out, from this Google Maps, like, where is Ashcroft, BC? You look like you are living in this beautiful oasis on rivers in the interior of British Columbia, north of Washington State, kind of looks like just east of the Rocky Mountains, or maybe west of the Rocky Mountains, or maybe in the Rocky Mountains. Thank you so much for calling us from there. And by the way, just as a side note, I got an email from somebody from Brazil saying, hey, I tried to call 1-833-READ-A-LOT, but the phone number doesn't work from where I am in Brazil. So I wanted to let you know we're trying to figure out a solution if you're calling from countries around the world. In the meantime, if you ever do feel like it, and I know it's a bit of work, just feel free to send us an audio recording because we can still play it. If you're from somewhere in the world where the phone number 1-833-READ-A-LOT is not working. We are looking into try to figure out an international phone number, though. We'd love to figure that out as long as it's affordable and doable. Now, Jim, the quotes you were saying, I was kind of listening to you, Slinky Malinky, the cat, and so I looked it up, and it looks like this is a book published in 1991 by New Zealand author Linley Dodd, featuring the adventurous, stalking, lurking cat Slinky Malinky, who is a common cat during the day but becomes a thief as night falls. And more importantly, I love that your heart sort of just went there, and I love that your brain took you back into those stories that you read as a child and you read to your children or grandchildren. That's the magic of books, right? That's the transporting quality that we can be wherever we are right now, and yet we can zoom in and out of both time and space and distance into worlds that are all annexed into the one that we're living in today. It gets back to that quote I said in the very first chapter of the show, that a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies, and a man who never reads lives only one. So thank you so much for sharing your brief reflection with us, Jim. And for those who would like to share theirs, a book you've loved, a theme that hits your head, or a direction that a chapter sends you flying in, please feel free to call us at 1-833-READ-A-LOT. And now it's time for the review of the chapter. And for this one, we are going to get a review from iTunes. It is from Mrs. Schlossler. Okay, Mrs. Schlossler. 5 stars, like a book club, only better. She says, I don't always take the time to read anymore. This is an issue. I don't always take the time to read anymore, but I'm trying to change that. This podcast is great. See, I grew up with books, was a library page as a teen to earn pocket money, and I'm trying to raise 2 avid readers. 3 Books is awesome. It brings up great memories of books I've read, challenges with books that I might read someday, and entertains with facts and stories that Neil and his guests share. Highly recommended. Thank you, Mrs. Schlosser. By the way, I'm now super curious what a library page is to a teenager or to anybody. Library page. I'm picturing somebody kind of running around helping senators. I don't know, helping librarians. What is a library page? That's this chapter's big question. And we're going to close this week with the word of the chapter. Remember, the word of the chapter is a word that my guest sometimes says, and I stumble on it myself, or I roll around in my head and I don't really know what the word means, or I want to understand it further, and I share it with you at the end of the chapter as the word of the chapter. Now, Dave used a lot of interesting words. I actually wrote down a few of the words I was thinking about picking. He used the word crestfallen, and he used deadpan and inundated and gravitas and all these things. And you might be like, yeah, Neil, I know some of those words. But here's a word that he used that I didn't know very well, which is erudite. Erudite. Let's make that the word of the chapter. Erudite. E-R-U-D-I-T-E. E-R-U-D-I-T-E. Erudite. Well, what does it mean? Well, it turns out the word E, the sort of beginning, the letter E means missing in Latin, and rudite or rudis means ignorant. So erudite means missing ignorance. Well, if you're missing ignorance, then you're there for somebody who is not ignorant. You've been transformed from a roughened or uninformed state into a polished and knowledgeable one through a devotion to learning. Erudite. I like that because aren't we all trying to do that? Aren't we all trying? And by the way, this definition is from Merriam-Webster. So that exact quote, transformed from a roughened or uninformed state to a polished and knowledgeable one through a devotion to learning. Well, I hope that we are polishing ourselves together on 3 Books. And I want to close with that, with all the words of wisdom that Dave shared with us, the conversation way down in Coral Gables, Florida. Remember, until next time, everybody, you are what you eat and you are what you read. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you soon.